The text message appeared on my phone at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, shattering the peaceful silence of my Venice Beach apartment like a brick through glass. Your brother Tyler needs money for rehab. We're driving from Ohio to California. Be there Tuesday. The audacity hit me like a physical slap across the face. These were the same parents who called me selfish for moving to Los Angeles, who refused to help with moving expenses, who stopped returning my calls when I struggled those first 6 months. Now that my design business was finally thriving, they suddenly remembered I existed, but they had absolutely no idea what they were walking into this time. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, my hands trembling as memories flooded back like a dam bursting open. 2 years ago, I had been a different person, entirely trapped in a soul-crushing corporate marketing job in Columbus, Ohio, watching my creativity die a slow death behind a gray cubicle wall. I had saved every penny I could scrape together living off peanut butter sandwiches and cheap coffee until I finally had $12,000 sitting in my checking account. That money represented freedom possibility, the chance to chase my dream of becoming a freelance graphic designer in the city, where dreams supposedly came true. My parents, Janet and Robert, had been absolutely furious when I announced my plans. They called it reckless, irresponsible, a foolish fantasy that would end in disaster. My mother paced around our childhood living room, her hands flying through the air as she listed every possible way I could fail. My father sat in his worn recliner, shaking his head and muttering about how I was abandoning my family responsibilities. Their golden child, my brother Tyler, was already struggling with what they delicately called his addiction issues, and they expected me to stay close to help manage the endless cycle of crisis and recovery. But I was 26 years old, and I refused to spend the rest of my life cleaning up Tyler's messes while my own dreams withered away. The guilt they piled on was suffocating thick as Ohio humidity in August. They painted pictures of Tyler spiraling further without my support of them growing old and needing help, that I wouldn't be there to provide of me becoming a selfish stranger who cared more about artistic ambitions than family loyalty. The first 6 months in Los Angeles had been absolutely brutal, worse than anything I could have imagined. I lived in a tiny studio apartment in North Hollywood that smelled perpetually of cigarette smoke from the unit below. The walls were paper thin, and I could hear every argument, every late-night television show, every crying baby in the building. I survived on ramen noodles and whatever free samples I could find at grocery stores, carefully rationing every dollar while I built my portfolio and searched desperately for clients. I called home religiously every Sunday, hoping for encouragement, for some sign that my parents were proud of my courage in pursuing my dreams. Instead, my mother criticized every decision I made. The apartment was too expensive for what I was getting. Los Angeles was dangerous and full of superficial people. I should have stayed in Ohio where I belonged, where family mattered more than selfish ambitions. My father barely spoke to me during those calls, offering only grunts and non-committal responses when I tried to share the small victories I was achieving. When my laptop died in month 4, taking 3 weeks of work with it because I hadn't backed up my files properly, I swallowed my pride and called them for help. I needed just $800 to replace my computer and recover the lost data. I explained that this was my livelihood, my only way to earn money and build my business. My mother's response still echoed in my ears like a cruel song. "You made your bed, Kristen, now lie in it. Maybe this will teach you about making responsible decisions." I hung up that phone call and cried for 2 hours straight, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. But something shifted in me during those tears. I realized I was truly on my own, that I couldn't count on anyone but myself to make my dreams reality. I took on 3 different part-time jobs, working as a barista in the morning, doing data entry in the afternoon, and designing logos for local businesses at night. I slept 4 hours a night for months, surviving on determination and coffee, slowly rebuilding everything I had lost. But here was the twist that made my stomach churn with betrayal even now 2 years later. While I was researching flights and hotels for their supposed visit, curiosity led me to check my cousin Madison's Facebook page. Madison lived just 20 minutes from my parents in Columbus, and her recent posts told a very different story than the one I had been fed about their financial struggles. 3 months ago, she had posted pictures from a family barbecue at my parents' house, showing off their brand new $40,000 recreational vehicle parked proudly in the driveway. The post was full of excited comments about their retirement travel plans, their upcoming cross-country adventure, their freedom to explore America now that they were done raising children. My mother was beaming in the photos, standing next to the gleaming RV like a proud new car owner, while my father pointed out various features to impress neighbors. Madison's posts from the past year painted a clear picture of my parents living their best life, traveling from state to state in their luxury mobile home, visiting national parks and tourist attractions, posting sunset photos from different campgrounds across the country. They weren't struggling financially at all. They had money to fund their retirement adventures, money to buy expensive camping equipment, and dine at local restaurants wherever they traveled. But when their own daughter needed $800 to save her business and her future, they claimed poverty and taught me harsh lessons about self-reliance. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected, like discovering that the people you trusted most had been lying to your face for years. They had watched me struggle, watched me work myself to exhaustion, watched me go hungry some nights so I could save money for business expenses, all while they were living comfortably and planning their luxury retirement travels. The woman who told me I had made my bed was sleeping every night in a $40,000 recreational vehicle, probably more comfortable than any bed I had been able to afford during those early months in California. Tuesday arrived with the crushing inevitability of a natural disaster. I watched from my apartment window as my parents pulled their massive recreational vehicle into the narrow street outside my building, the chrome gleaming in the California sunshine like a monument to their hypocrisy. The vehicle was even more impressive in person than it had looked in Madison's Facebook photos, equipped with solar panels, a satellite dish, and enough storage space to house a small family comfortably. My mother emerged first, her gray hair perfectly styled, despite supposedly driving cross-country for days. She wore a crisp white blouse and pressed khaki pants, the picture of comfortable retirement living. She immediately began surveying my neighborhood with obvious disapproval, her nose wrinkling as she took in the eclectic mix of surfers, artists, and young professionals that made Venice Beach so vibrant and alive. My father followed more slowly, his attention focused on his smartphone screen rather than the reunion with his daughter he hadn't spoken to in 18 months. He had gained weight since I last saw him, his face fuller and more relaxed than I remembered from the stressed, worried man who had argued against my move to California. Retirement was clearly treating him well. They knocked on my door with the casual confidence of people who expected to be welcomed with open arms. When I opened it, my mother immediately pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes scanning every corner with the critical assessment of a real estate appraiser. "Well, this is certainly expensive for what you're getting," she announced without so much as a hello or hug. "How much are you paying for this tiny space in Ohio? You could rent a 3-bedroom house for less than this probably costs." My father finally looked up from his phone long enough to give me a brief nod that might have been considered a greeting. "Good to see you're doing well," he said, in a tone that suggested he wasn't particularly pleased about my success. He positioned himself near the window, presumably to keep an eye on their expensive recreational vehicle, while maintaining minimal engagement with our family reunion. They had obviously assumed they would be staying with me for the week, making themselves comfortable on my couch and expecting me to rearrange my life around their visit. My mother opened my refrigerator without asking permission, shaking her head at the organic vegetables and expensive coffee that represented my hard-earned ability to finally eat well. Still wasting money on overpriced food, I see. Some things never change. The manipulation began before I could even process their presence in my space. My mother launched into an elaborate explanation of Tyler's current crisis, painting a picture of desperate addiction and family emergency, that required immediate financial intervention. According to her version of events, Tyler's drug problem had escalated dramatically since I moved away, and my absence had somehow contributed to his downward spiral. They needed $15,000 for a 30-day inpatient rehabilitation program at an exclusive facility in Malibu, a place that specialized in treating wealthy celebrities and promised the kind of comprehensive care that could finally save Tyler's life. My father chimed in with observations about my apparent success, mentioning how impressive my business looked based on my Instagram posts and website portfolio. He had clearly done research, noting my recent contract with a major technology startup, and calculating that $15,000 should be easily manageable for someone with my income level. The implication was clear. I had money, Tyler needed help, and family loyalty demanded that I solve this problem immediately. The familiar pressure settled over me like a heavy blanket, the childhood dynamic where my needs and feelings became secondary to whatever crisis Tyler had created this time. I had built my business from absolutely nothing, working 16-hour days for months, missing social events and potential relationships because I was always working on projects or searching for new clients. I had sacrificed everything for the stability I now enjoyed, and they wanted me to hand over $15,000 to fund Tyler's recovery while having completely ignored my own struggles and desperate pleas for help. But something felt wrong about the entire situation beyond just their obvious hypocrisy and manipulation. Where was Tyler in all of this? Why hadn't he called me himself if he truly wanted help getting clean? And why were they so confident that I would agree to fund his treatment after 18 months of total silence from them? My questions were answered when the recreational vehicle door opened again and Tyler emerged into the California sunshine. Even from my third-floor window, I could see that something was seriously wrong with this picture. He moved with the loose, unsteady gait of someone under the influence of something powerful. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair, unwashed, his entire appearance screaming active addiction rather than someone seeking recovery. Tyler looked up at my building with the calculating expression of someone surveying potential opportunities rather than the shame and desperation I would expect from someone ready to commit to rehabilitation. He started pointing at different aspects of the neighborhood, commenting to our parents about the obvious wealth displayed in the area. The expensive cars parked along the street, the upscale restaurants and boutiques that suggested disposable income. When I opened the door to confront them about this discrepancy, Tyler greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey there, successful sister," he said, his words slightly slurred despite it being early afternoon. "Nice place you've got here. Must be doing pretty well for yourself in the big city." His gaze immediately began cataloging my possessions, lingering on my computer setup, my expensive camera equipment, the original artwork I had finally been able to afford for my walls. He asked pointed questions about my work equipment, wondering aloud about the value of various items and how much money I must be making to afford such nice things. "That laptop looks expensive," he observed, running his fingers along the edge of my desk. "Bet something like that costs more than most people make in a month back home. And all these cameras and design stuff probably worth more than a car, right?" The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Tyler wasn't seeking recovery at all. My parents had brought him to California hoping I would take responsibility for him essentially dumping their problem child on my doorstep while they continued their comfortable retirement travels. They expected me to become Tyler's new enabler and caretaker, solving their family crisis by absorbing the chaos into my carefully built life. This wasn't about rehabilitation or family love or helping Tyler get clean. This was about transferring the burden of dealing with his addiction from them to me, using guilt and manipulation to make me responsible for problems I hadn't created and couldn't solve. They had researched my success, calculated my income, and decided that I owed them a solution to the Tyler problem that had been disrupting their retirement plans. I woke up the next morning to discover Tyler had helped himself to more than just a place to crash. My laptop charger was missing from my desk, and the $40 I always kept in my purse for emergencies had vanished overnight. When I confronted my parents about these small but telling thefts, my mother immediately jumped to Tyler's defense with the practiced ease of someone who had been making excuses for him for years. "He's sick, Kristen." She said, her voice taking on that martyred tone I remembered so well from childhood arguments. Addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. He needs compassion and understanding, not accusations and judgment. Maybe if you had stayed closer to home, you would understand how difficult this has been for all of us. My father maintained his position by the window, still more concerned with monitoring their recreational vehicle than participating in family discussions. When I pressed him about the stolen items, he shrugged dismissively. "It's probably just a misunderstanding. Tyler's confused, not thinking clearly. You should be more understanding about his condition instead of focusing on material possessions." The conversation escalated quickly when I demanded explanations for the 18 months of complete silence, the refused help when I was desperately struggling, and their sudden renewed interest in family relationships now that I had achieved financial stability. I wanted answers about why their daughter's needs had been ignored, while their son's addiction was treated as everyone else's emergency to solve. My mother launched into a passionate speech about how I had abandoned the family during Tyler's darkest period, choosing selfish career ambitions over family loyalty and responsibility. According to her version of reality, my success meant nothing if I wasn't willing to use it to help family members in crisis. She painted my move to California as an act of betrayal, leaving them to deal with Tyler's addiction alone, while I pursued my artistic dreams in a city full of shallow, materialistic people. But I wasn't the naive young woman who had left Ohio 2 years ago, desperate for approval and willing to sacrifice my own well-being for family peace. I had learned to ask harder questions to demand real answers instead of accepting guilt trips and emotional manipulation. I wanted to know how they could afford a $40,000 recreational vehicle while claiming they couldn't help with an $800 emergency loan. I wanted to understand how Tyler's addiction was somehow my responsibility when I lived 2,000 miles away and had been completely cut off from family communication. During this heated discussion, I noticed my father making notes in a small spiral notebook, jotting down details about my apartment, my work setup, and my obvious financial stability. When I asked about his note-taking, he claimed he was simply keeping track of family conversations, but something about his evasive response made my instincts scream warnings. Later that afternoon, while Tyler was passed out on my couch and my mother was criticizing my grocery choices, my father revealed the true scope of their planning. He had been researching my business extensively, using social media posts and public business records to estimate my income and calculate my ability to provide family support. He knew about my major clients, my recent contract successes, and my approximate monthly earnings. They hadn't come to California on an impulsive rescue mission. They had been planning this financial extraction for months. "We talked to a family lawyer back in Ohio," he said casually, as if discussing the weather rather than legal action against his own daughter. "Did you know that in some states, adult children have financial responsibilities to support family members in crisis situations? There are laws about family obligations that might surprise you." My mother nodded approvingly, adding her own legal theories about moral obligations and family loyalty. "That lawyer said we might have options if you refuse to help Tyler get the treatment he needs. Apparently, when someone has the means to help family members and chooses not to, there can be legal consequences." The threat was delivered with the casual confidence of people who believed they held all the power in this situation. They had come to California armed with legal research, financial calculations, and a plan to guilt or intimidate me into funding Tyler's supposed recovery. They saw my success as family property, something they were entitled to access when their own plans fell short. But their trump card was still waiting in the recreational vehicle. My father disappeared outside and returned carrying a manila folder thick with documents and paperwork. He spread the contents across my coffee table with the ceremony of someone revealing a winning poker hand. The papers were legal documents they had prepared with their Ohio attorney, attempting to establish some form of financial guardianship arrangement for Tyler's care and treatment. The paperwork suggested that I, as Tyler's financially successful sister, had both moral and legal obligations to support his medical expenses and rehabilitation costs. They had researched California laws about family responsibility and adult-child obligations, trying to create a legal framework that would force me to pay for Tyler's treatment whether I wanted to or not. The documents were professionally prepared, complete with official letterhead and legal language that suggested serious consequences for refusing family support obligations. They had invested time and money into building a case against their own daughter, treating me like a hostile entity to be conquered rather than a family member to be loved and respected. "This is just a precaution." My mother explained, her tone suggesting this was perfectly reasonable family planning. "We're hoping you'll do the right thing voluntarily, but we wanted to make sure Tyler gets the help he needs either way. Family takes care of family, Kristen, and sometimes that means making legal arrangements to ensure everyone meets their responsibilities." The manipulation had evolved into outright extortion. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding payment under threat of legal action. They had turned my success into evidence of my obligation to solve their family crisis, as if achieving financial stability meant I owed them access to my hard-earned resources. I realized this had been their plan all along. The 18 months of silence weren't punishment for moving away. They were strategic preparation for this moment. They had watched my business grow through social media, calculated my earning potential, researched legal options for extracting money, and planned this confrontation, like a military operation, against an enemy target. My own parents had spent months preparing to legally and emotionally manipulate me into funding their family crisis, treating my success as their retirement insurance policy and my business as their backup plan for Tyler's endless addiction cycle. They saw me not as their daughter who had courageously pursued her dreams despite their lack of support, but as a resource to be harvested when their other options ran out. I pushed those legal documents back across my coffee table with enough force to scatter some pages onto the floor, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief that surprised me with its intensity. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steady despite the emotional hurricane spinning inside my chest. "And I want all of you out of my apartment right now." My parents exchanged glances that spoke of backup plans and alternative strategies they had obviously discussed during their cross-country drive. Instead of leaving, they doubled down on their aggressive approach. My mother announced they would be staying in their recreational vehicle parked directly outside my building for as long as necessary to resolve this family crisis. She made it clear they had no intention of returning to Ohio empty-handed, regardless of my feelings about their demands. "We're not going anywhere until Tyler gets the help he needs," she declared with the righteous conviction of someone who believed family emergencies justified any level of manipulation or boundary violation. "You can't just abandon your brother when he's fighting for his life. We'll stay here until you remember what family loyalty actually means." But their presence outside my building was just the beginning of their campaign to force my compliance. My mother began what could only be described as a neighborhood harassment campaign, introducing herself to my neighbors and sharing intimate details about our family situation with anyone willing to listen. She positioned herself near the building entrance during peak hours, catching residents as they came and went from work. "I'm Janet Kristen's mother from Ohio," she would announce to strangers, her voice carrying the particular combination of sweetness and manipulation that she had perfected over decades of getting her way. "We're here because our family is in crisis, and unfortunately, my daughter seems to have forgotten her family responsibilities since moving to this expensive city. It's so sad when success changes. People, don't you think?" The embarrassment was excruciating. These were people I had worked hard to build professional relationships with, neighbors who might refer clients to my business or who had become friendly acquaintances over the past 2 years. Now my mother was painting me as a cold, selfish daughter who refused to help her addicted brother, sharing family drama with people who had no business knowing our personal problems. She told them about Tyler's addiction, about the expensive rehabilitation program he desperately needed, about my financial success, and apparent unwillingness to use it for family emergencies. She presented herself as a heartbroken mother whose successful daughter had become too good for her family, creating a narrative designed to generate sympathy and social pressure. Meanwhile, Tyler became increasingly erratic as whatever substances he had been using wore off, and withdrawal symptoms began affecting his behavior. He paced around my apartment like a caged animal, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. His mood swung wildly between aggressive demands for money and pathetic pleas for understanding, creating an atmosphere of unpredictable tension that made it impossible to focus on work or feel safe in my own home. But Tyler's most disturbing behavior was his systematic gathering of information about my business and personal life. He had been listening to my work phone calls, memorizing client names and project details. He photographed my workspace when he thought I wasn't looking, capturing images of contracts, invoices, and business correspondence that contained sensitive information about my professional relationships. "I know all about your fancy clients," he said during one of his more aggressive moments, his eyes bright with the particular malice that comes with addiction and desperation. "That tech startup you're always talking to on the phone, those logo projects worth thousands of dollars. Bet they'd be real interested to know about your family situation, about how you treat people who need help." The threat was clear: cooperate with their demands or face professional sabotage. Tyler had gathered enough information to potentially damage my business relationships, either by contacting clients directly or by creating online reviews and social media posts that could harm my reputation. He understood that my business depended on trust and professional credibility, and he was willing to destroy both if I didn't fund his supposed recovery. The psychological pressure was becoming unbearable. I couldn't work effectively with Tyler wandering around my apartment, couldn't take client calls without worrying about what information he might overhear and how he might use it against me. My mother's neighborhood campaign was generating awkward conversations with neighbors who didn't know how to respond to her boundary violations and manipulation tactics. Tyler revealed another layer of their calculated attack when he started sharing details about how they had spent months preparing for this confrontation. Back in Ohio, my parents had been systematically destroying my reputation in our hometown, telling friends, relatives, and family acquaintances that I had become cold and materialistic since moving to California. They painted me as someone who had forgotten her roots and abandoned her family responsibilities in pursuit of selfish success. "Everyone back home knows you think you're too good for us now," Tyler said with obvious satisfaction at delivering this emotional blow. "Mom and Dad told the whole family about how you wouldn't help when I was really struggling, how you just disappeared to chase your dreams while your brother was dying from addiction. They know you care more about money than family." My reputation in the place where I had grown up among people who had watched me develop into the person I became had been systematically poisoned by my own parents. They had used my absence and their control of the family narrative to paint me as the villain in Tyler's addiction story, creating a version of reality where my success proved my selfishness rather than my determination and hard work. The emotional manipulation reached its peak when Tyler accused me of being directly responsible for his addiction, escalating after I moved away. According to his version of events, losing my support and presence had sent him into a downward spiral that nearly cost him his life. He claimed that my decision to pursue my dreams in California was an act of abandonment that had pushed him deeper into drug use and self-destructive behavior. The guilt they were piling on me was suffocating, designed to make me feel responsible for every bad decision Tyler had made and every consequence he had faced. They wanted me to believe that my success came at the cost of Tyler's well-being, that achieving my dreams meant abandoning my family obligations, that I owed them financial compensation for the pain my independence had supposedly caused. That evening, the situation reached a crescendo that shattered any remaining illusions about their true intentions. Tyler had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the day, pacing more frantically and making increasingly aggressive demands for money. I assumed his behavior was related to withdrawal from whatever substances he had been using, but the reality was much worse than I had imagined. I was in my bedroom trying to escape the toxic atmosphere by working on a design project when I heard a loud crash from the bathroom. When I rushed to investigate, I found Tyler collapsed on the floor, his breathing shallow and irregular, his skin taking on a frightening blue-tinted pallor that screamed medical emergency. I immediately called 911, my hands shaking as I tried to perform the basic first aid I remembered from a workplace safety course years earlier. The paramedics arrived within minutes, working quickly to stabilize Tyler's condition and prepare him for transport to the nearest hospital. During those terrifying moments, all family drama disappeared as I focused solely on the possibility that my brother might die in my bathroom. But as the paramedics loaded Tyler into the ambulance, my parents arrived and immediately began a new phase of their manipulation campaign. Instead of gratitude for my quick action in calling for help or concern for Tyler's life-threatening condition, they immediately started assigning blame for the overdose. My mother's voice reached a pitch of hysteria that could probably be heard throughout the building as she screamed accusations at me. "This is your fault!" She shrieked, her finger pointing at me like a weapon. "You created this stressful situation. You pushed him to this point with your selfishness and refusal to help family." My father, who had barely spoken to me since arriving in California, suddenly found his voice long enough to threaten legal consequences for my supposed role in Tyler's overdose. "You better hope nothing happens to him," he said, his tone carrying implications that made my blood run cold. "Because if Tyler doesn't make it, everyone's going to know that you had the power to prevent this and chose not to use it." They were actually threatening to tell police that I had somehow enabled Tyler's drug use, that my refusal to fund his rehabilitation had pushed him to attempt suicide through overdose. They were willing to destroy me completely, to potentially have me arrested and charged with crimes related to Tyler's addiction, rather than take responsibility for their own enabling behavior and manipulative tactics. Even in the face of a life-threatening family emergency, even as their son fought for his life in the back of an ambulance, my parents were more focused on winning their financial extraction game than on acknowledging their own failures or supporting their family members through crisis. They saw Tyler's overdose not as a tragedy requiring family unity, but as another tool to manipulate me into compliance with their demands. The paramedic who had been monitoring Tyler's condition looked at my parents with obvious disgust as they continued their blame campaign. "Ma'am, your son needs medical attention right now," he said firmly. "This isn't the time for family arguments. You can sort out blame later, but right now we need to focus on saving his life." As the ambulance pulled away with Tyler inside, I realized that my parents had been willing to use even their son's potential death as leverage in their campaign to extract money from me. There was no depth they wouldn't sink to no boundary they wouldn't cross, no manipulation they wouldn't attempt in order to get what they wanted from my success. At the hospital, while Tyler was being stabilized in the emergency department, I found myself sitting in the waiting room, listening to my parents discuss his medical history with the attending physician. Their conversation revealed details about Tyler's addiction that I had never heard before, painting a picture of systematic enabling and manipulation that went far deeper than I had ever imagined. The doctor asked about Tyler's previous overdoses, and my mother casually mentioned this was his 4th emergency room visit in the past 18 months. She listed his multiple failed rehabilitation attempts with the weary tone of someone reciting a familiar grocery list mentioning facilities in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis that had apparently been unable to help Tyler maintain sobriety for more than a few weeks at a time. "We've tried everything," she told the doctor, her voice carrying the practiced exhaustion of a martyr who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful child. "Private treatment, outpatient programs, family therapy support groups. Nothing seems to work for more than a month or two before he relapses again." When the doctor inquired about insurance coverage and payment arrangements for Tyler's emergency treatment, my father mentioned something that caught my attention like a fishhook snagging in deep water. His grandmother's trust fund should cover most of the medical expenses, he said matter-of-factly. We've been using it for his treatment costs over the past few years. This detail struck me as completely wrong based on everything I remembered about our family financial situation. I clearly recalled my grandmother leaving college education funds for both Tyler and me when she passed away during our teenage years, but my parents had always claimed that Tyler had blown through his inheritance money on drugs and partying during his early 20s. While my parents were occupied with insurance paperwork and medical forms, I stepped outside the hospital and called my Aunt Sarah, my grandmother's other daughter who still lived in Columbus and maintained relationships with the extended family. If anyone would know the truth about Tyler's trust fund situation, it would be Sarah. The conversation that followed completely shattered my understanding of my family's financial dynamics and revealed a level of betrayal that left me literally speechless for several minutes. According to Sarah, Tyler's trust fund had been substantial when our grandmother died, nearly $60,000, specifically designated for his education and early adult expenses. My parents had been appointed trustees of the fund when Tyler turned 18, giving them legal authority to manage disbursements for his legitimate needs. But Sarah had been keeping informal track of Tyler's trust fund activity through occasional conversations with my parents over the years, and the financial picture she painted was completely different from what I had been told. According to her records, my parents had been withdrawing money regularly from Tyler's account, always claiming the funds were necessary for rehabilitation programs, medical expenses, or addiction-related emergencies. They told me Tyler was in expensive treatment facilities constantly. Sarah explained, her voice carrying growing concern as she realized the implications of our conversation. Your mother would call every few months asking me to pray for Tyler's recovery from whatever program he was supposedly attending. She made it sound like they were spending thousands of dollars every month on his addiction treatment. Sarah had been supportive of these supposed treatment efforts, even contributing her own money occasionally when my parents claimed Tyler's trust fund needed supplementing for particularly expensive rehabilitation programs. She had been under the impression that Tyler was receiving the best possible addiction treatment that money could buy, funded by his inheritance and supplemented by his parents' retirement savings. But when I described Tyler's actual condition and behavior during their visit to California, Sarah's concern turned to alarm. Kristen, if Tyler has been in legitimate rehabilitation programs, as much as your parents claimed he should be much healthier than what you're describing, and if they've been using his trust fund appropriately, there should still be substantial money available for his treatment. The mathematical reality was devastating when Sarah and I worked through the numbers together. Tyler's trust fund should have been able to pay for years of high-quality addiction treatment, even at the most expensive facilities available. But if my parents had been withdrawing money regularly for supposed medical expenses, and Tyler was still actively addicted and had overdosed multiple times, then either the treatment programs were completely ineffective or the money wasn't actually being used for Tyler's recovery. Sarah promised to contact the bank where Tyler's trust fund was managed and request detailed records of all withdrawals and expenses over the past few years. As Tyler's aunt and our grandmother's daughter, she had some legal standing to inquire about potential misuse of trust funds, especially if there were concerns about financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. When I returned to the hospital waiting room, I found my parents in quiet conversation about Tyler's financial situation, and their discussion confirmed my worst suspicions about their trust fund management. They were calculating how much money remained in Tyler's account and how long it would last if they continued their current withdrawal pattern for supposed medical expenses. We might get 6 more months out of it if we're careful, my father was saying, his voice low enough that he thought I couldn't hear from across the waiting room. But after that, we're going to need alternative funding sources for his treatment. My mother nodded grimly. That's why Kristen needs to step up and take some responsibility for her brother's care. She's making good money now, and family obligations don't just disappear because someone moves across the country. They were planning to exhaust whatever remained of Tyler's trust fund, then transition to extracting money from my business as their long-term funding strategy for Tyler's supposed treatment costs. They had calculated that my income could sustain their family financial needs, indefinitely providing them with resources to maintain their comfortable retirement lifestyle, while claiming all expenses were necessary for Tyler's addiction recovery. But the most devastating revelation came when Tyler regained consciousness and was able to have honest conversations without my parents hovering over him like protective guards. The medical staff had stabilized his condition, and the social worker assigned to his case had arranged for some privacy so Tyler could discuss his addiction and recovery options without family pressure. Away from my parents' constant supervision and manipulation, Tyler began sharing details about his supposed treatment history that completely contradicted everything they had been telling me and the rest of the family. According to Tyler, he had only been in legitimate rehabilitation programs twice in his entire life, and both stays had lasted less than 30 days before my parents withdrew him against medical advice. "They always tell people I'm in treatment," Tyler said, his voice weak but clear enough to convey the devastating truth. "But most of the time, they just give me money from the trust fund and tell me to figure things out on my own. Every time I try to get real help, they find reasons why the program isn't working or why we need to try something different." Tyler revealed that his addiction had actually worsened over the years because my parents had been sabotaging his recovery attempts. Every time he expressed genuine desire to get clean, they would provide him with money from his trust fund, ostensibly for living expenses and recovery support, but knowing full well that he would spend the money on drugs instead of treatment. "They need me to stay sick," Tyler said with heartbreaking clarity. "As long as I'm addicted, they can keep taking money out of my trust fund for my treatment. If I actually got better, they'd lose their access to that money." The systematic financial exploitation had been going on for years, with my parents using Tyler's addiction as justification for withdrawing thousands of dollars from his inheritance, while preventing him from receiving the kind of comprehensive treatment that might actually help him achieve sobriety. They had been financially dependent on his trust fund while presenting themselves to the extended family as martyred parents, sacrificing everything to save their addicted son. Tyler broke down as he explained how many times he had begged for real help for admission to long-term treatment programs, for the kind of comprehensive care that could address both his addiction and the underlying mental health issues that contributed to his substance abuse. Every time my parents had found excuses to avoid spending trust fund money on legitimate treatment, instead providing him with cash that they knew he would use to continue his addiction cycle. "I've been wanting to get clean for over a year," Tyler said through tears that seemed to come from the deepest parts of his soul. "But every time I try, they sabotage it. They give me money, they create drama, they find ways to make me think recovery isn't possible. As long as I'm sick, they can live comfortable lives on my inheritance money." The next morning, I began the most important project of my life, documenting every aspect of my parents' financial exploitation and systematic manipulation of our entire family. I started by photographing all the legal documents they had brought from Ohio, capturing every page of their attempted financial guardianship paperwork and their threats to force me into paying for Tyler's supposed treatment costs. I activated the voice recording app on my phone and began keeping detailed audio records of every conversation with my parents, capturing their admissions about accessing Tyler's trust fund and their plans to extract money from my business as an alternative funding source. California is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, which meant I could legally document their words without their knowledge or permission. The family law attorney I contacted specialized in financial exploitation cases, particularly situations involving vulnerable adults whose resources were being misused by trusted family members. When I explained Tyler's situation and shared the evidence I had gathered, her immediate response was that this appeared to be a clear case of trustee abuse and potential criminal financial exploitation. "What you're describing sounds like systematic theft," she said during our initial consultation, reviewing the photographs of trust fund withdrawal records that Sarah had obtained from the bank. Trustees have fiduciary duties to act in the best interests of the beneficiary, and using trust funds for personal expenses while preventing the beneficiary from receiving proper care is a serious violation of those duties. Meanwhile, Tyler was beginning to experience what real recovery support looked like for the first time in years. The hospital social worker had connected him with addiction counselors who weren't being paid or influenced by my parents' professionals who could evaluate his needs objectively and recommend appropriate treatment options. Away from my parents' constant sabotage and manipulation, Tyler was finally able to express his genuine desire for sobriety and long-term recovery. "I want to get clean," he told the addiction counselor with more clarity and determination than I had heard from him in years. "I'm tired of being sick, tired of being used, tired of hurting people I care about. But I need real help, not whatever my parents have been calling treatment." The counselor explained that Tyler's pattern of short-term treatment, followed by immediate relapse, was consistent with insufficient or inappropriate care, rather than treatment-resistant addiction. Many people required multiple attempts at recovery, but the programs Tyler described didn't sound like evidence-based addiction treatment. Instead, they sounded like brief detoxification, followed by discharge without comprehensive recovery support. Tyler began sharing additional details about his parents' financial exploitation that I hadn't known about. They had been using his trust fund not just for their recreational vehicle and travel expenses, but also for home improvements, luxury purchases, and other personal expenses that had nothing to do with his medical care or recovery needs. They had convinced him that he owed them compensation for the stress his addiction had caused. The family making him feel grateful that they were willing to use his inheritance money to support their retirement lifestyle. They told me I should feel lucky they were willing to take care of me instead of giving up on me completely. Tyler said, his voice heavy with the realization of how deeply he had been manipulated. They made me think that using my money for their expenses was just part of family obligations, that I owed them for everything they had sacrificed to deal with my addiction. But Tyler's most important revelation was his willingness to cooperate with legal authorities to hold my parents accountable for their financial crimes. He understood that real recovery would be impossible as long as they continued controlling his resources and sabotaging his treatment efforts. He wanted to break free from their manipulation and build a genuine relationship with family members who supported his health rather than exploiting his illness. "I'll testify against them if I have to," Tyler said with remarkable strength for someone who had been financially and emotionally abused for years. "I'm tired of being their victim, and I'm tired of watching them hurt other people too. What they did to you when you needed help, what they're trying to do to you now, it's not okay." Sarah had been working with the bank to obtain complete records of Tyler's trust fund activity, and the evidence of financial exploitation was even worse than we had initially suspected. My parents had withdrawn over $40,000 from Tyler's inheritance over the past 3 years, always claiming medical emergency or treatment necessity, but with no corresponding evidence of legitimate addiction treatment or medical care. The bank records showed a pattern of regular withdrawals that coincided with my parents' recreational vehicle purchase, their travel expenses, and their home renovation projects. They had been systematically stealing Tyler's inheritance to fund their comfortable retirement while claiming poverty when their own daughter needed emergency assistance. My attorney explained that this level of financial exploitation carried serious legal consequences under both civil and criminal law. Trustee abuse is prosecutable as theft, and the amounts involved here make it felony-level financial exploitation, she said. Additionally, their threats against your business and attempts to extort money from you could be charged as criminal extortion. But the most powerful evidence I had gathered was completely accidental. My phone's automatic cloud backup system had been recording and storing conversations in the background, capturing hours of my parents' discussions about their plans to manipulate me into funding Tyler's supposed treatment. These recordings contained explicit admissions of their financial exploitation, their intention to exhaust Tyler's trust fund before targeting my business income, and their strategies for using guilt and legal threats to force my compliance. "We've got her backed into a corner now," my mother's voice said clearly in one recording. "She can't refuse to help Tyler without looking like a monster, and if she tries to fight us legally, we'll make sure everyone knows how selfish she's become since getting successful." In another recording, my father discussed their long-term plans for accessing my business income. "Once we establish that she has family obligations for Tyler's care, we can probably get regular monthly payments instead of just lump sums. Think of it like family support payments, but without having to go through divorce court." They had been planning to treat my business success as family property, establishing legal or emotional mechanisms to extract ongoing payments for Tyler's care, while continuing to prevent him from receiving legitimate treatment that might actually help him recover. Their goal wasn't Tyler's health. It was permanent access to external funding sources that would allow them to maintain their comfortable lifestyle without depleting their own retirement savings. The recordings also captured their discussions about sabotaging my business relationships if I refused to cooperate with their demands. They had researched my major clients and planned to contact them with stories about my family obligations and character flaws, hoping to damage my professional reputation enough to force my compliance with their financial demands. "She thinks she's so successful and independent," my mother said in one particularly damaging recording. "But all it takes is a few phone calls to the right people, and her fancy client relationships disappear. These California people care about image and reputation more than anything else." I had recorded evidence of criminal conspiracy, financial exploitation, extortion attempts, and planned interference with my business relationships. My parents had documented their own crimes through their casual discussions about illegal activities, giving me everything I needed to hold them accountable for years of financial abuse against both Tyler and myself. When my parents returned to the hospital expecting to continue their manipulation campaign and pressure me into signing their financial support agreements, they walked into a completely different situation than the one they had left. Instead of finding a guilt-ridden daughter ready to capitulate to their demands, they found me accompanied by my attorney and armed with comprehensive evidence of their systematic financial exploitation and criminal behavior. "We need to have a conversation about Tyler's trust fund." I said, my voice steady and confident in a way that immediately put them on the defensive. I placed copies of the bank records on the waiting room table, showing detailed documentation of every withdrawal from Tyler's inheritance and the complete absence of corresponding legitimate medical expenses or treatment costs. My mother's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious, shifting from confusion to recognition to panic as she realized the scope of evidence I had gathered. My father's immediate response was to claim that all trust fund expenditures had been necessary for Tyler's care, but his explanation sounded weak and rehearsed when confronted with actual financial records. Every penny was spent on Tyler's medical needs, he insisted, but his voice lacked the confidence he had displayed when threatening me with legal action just days earlier. Addiction treatment is expensive, and we had to try multiple programs when the initial treatments didn't work. My attorney calmly explained that trustee abuse carries serious penalties under California law, and that the evidence suggested years of systematic theft from a vulnerable adult's inheritance fund. She detailed how my parents' use of trust money for personal expenses while denying Tyler legitimate treatment constituted criminal financial exploitation that could result in felony charges and significant prison time. "Your recreational vehicle purchase travel expenses and home improvements were funded with money designated specifically for Tyler's education and medical care," she said, her tone professional but unmistakably threatening. "That constitutes theft of approximately $40,000 from a vulnerable adult who was being denied the treatment his inheritance was supposed to provide." But the real power shift came when I played selected portions of the recorded conversations where my parents discussed their plans to exhaust Tyler's trust fund before targeting my business income as their long-term funding strategy. Their own words provided irrefutable evidence of their criminal intentions and systematic exploitation of both their children. My father's recorded voice filled the hospital waiting room with damning admissions about treating my business success as family property and their plans to establish ongoing access to my income through manipulation and legal threats. My mother's voice described their strategies for sabotaging my professional relationships if I refused to cooperate with their financial demands. The transformation in my parents' demeanor was immediate and complete. Instead of aggressive demands and legal threats, they began making desperate attempts to explain away their recorded words and negotiate for some kind of compromise that would minimize their legal exposure. They suddenly discovered family loyalty and apologetic language that had been absent throughout their California visit. We were just frustrated and worried about Tyler. My mother said, her voice taking on a pleading tone that contrasted sharply with her previous demands and threats. We never meant to take advantage of anyone. We were just trying to help Tyler get better, and maybe our methods weren't perfect, but our intentions were good. My attorney explained that good intentions don't protect trustees from criminal liability when they systematically steal from the people they're supposed to protect. She detailed the legal consequences they faced: criminal charges for financial exploitation, civil liability for full restitution, plus damages, and potential imprisonment for felony theft and conspiracy. Tyler, who had been growing stronger and clearer as he received proper medical care and addiction counseling, chose this moment to deliver his own confrontation with our parents. With the support of his treatment team and the clarity that comes with honest sobriety, he told them exactly how their financial exploitation had prevented his recovery and prolonged his suffering. "You kept me sick so you could keep stealing from me," he said, his voice carrying the strength of someone who was finally ready to fight for his own health and well-being. "Every time I wanted real treatment, you found ways to sabotage it because you needed me to stay addicted to justify taking my money." Tyler announced his intention to press charges for financial abuse and to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations into their trust fund mismanagement. He wanted real recovery funded by his own inheritance money with professional treatment providers who weren't being paid or influenced by our parents. "I'm tired of being your victim," Tyler told them with remarkable dignity for someone who had been manipulated and exploited for so many years. "And I'm tired of watching you hurt other people too. What you did to Kristen when she needed help, what you're trying to do to her now, it ends today." My attorney presented my parents with a choice: immediate full restitution of Tyler's stolen inheritance money, plus funding for legitimate addiction treatment or criminal prosecution for financial exploitation and theft. They had 24 hours to decide whether they wanted to resolve this matter through civil restitution or face criminal charges that could result in prison sentences and permanent criminal records. Additionally, she continued, any further attempts to interfere with Kristen's business contact, her clients, or threaten her professional relationships will be treated as criminal harassment and extortion. The recorded conversations provide clear evidence of conspiracy to commit these crimes. Faced with potential prosecution, complete exposure of their financial crimes, and the loss of everything they had stolen from Tyler's inheritance, my parents chose the only option that allowed them to avoid prison. They agreed to immediate full restitution of Tyler's trust fund payment for comprehensive addiction treatment at a legitimate rehabilitation facility, and complete cessation of all contact with me unless specifically invited. The legal settlement required them to liquidate assets, including their recreational vehicle, to repay Tyler's stolen inheritance with interest and penalties. Their comfortable retirement travel plans disappeared overnight as they faced the financial consequences of years of systematic theft from their own son's inheritance fund. Tyler entered a 90-day residential treatment program specifically designed for people with trauma histories and complex addiction patterns. For the first time in years, he received evidence-based treatment from professionals who weren't being manipulated or controlled by family members with financial interests in keeping him sick. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire resolution was watching my parents face the complete destruction of their victim narrative. They could no longer present themselves as martyred parents, sacrificing everything for an ungrateful, addicted son. Instead, they were exposed as financial predators who had systematically exploited their vulnerable child while preventing him from receiving the help he desperately needed. Their reputation in our hometown was destroyed when the truth about Tyler's trust fund exploitation became public knowledge. The extended family members who had been contributing additional money to support Tyler's supposed treatment learned that their generosity had been funding my parents' recreational vehicle and travel expenses. Sarah made sure everyone knew exactly how their compassion had been exploited and manipulated. 6 months later, Tyler successfully completed his treatment program and moved into a sober living facility where he could continue building recovery skills while transitioning back to independent adult life. For the first time since his addiction began, he had access to his own inheritance money and could make decisions about his treatment and recovery without family manipulation or interference. "I'm finally taking care of myself instead of being someone's victim," Tyler told me during one of our weekly phone calls, "and I'm learning what real family support looks like instead of people who claim to love me while they're stealing from me." My business continued to thrive without the constant threat of family sabotage and manipulation. I maintained carefully structured contact with my parents, who were required to attend family counseling as part of their legal settlement, but I no longer felt obligated to sacrifice my well-being for their comfort or convenience. The experience taught me that the 18 months of silence from my parents hadn't been punishment for moving away. It had been an unexpected gift that allowed me to build strength, independence, and success without their toxic influence. I learned that real family relationships are based on mutual support and respect, not financial exploitation disguised as love and loyalty. Most importantly, I discovered that fighting back against family abuse isn't abandonment or betrayal. It's often the first step toward building authentic relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are actually the ones who are exploiting you worst, and protecting yourself from their abuse is an act of self-love rather than selfishness. Tyler and I began building a genuine relationship for the first time in our adult lives, one based on mutual support for each other's health and success, rather than crisis management and enabling behavior. We learned that family loyalty means supporting each other's growth and well-being, not covering up abuse or maintaining toxic dynamics for the sake of keeping peace. My parents eventually completed their court-mandated counseling and began taking tentative steps toward acknowledging the damage their financial exploitation had caused. Recovery from family financial abuse is a long process, but for the first time in years, there was hope for relationships based on honesty and respect rather than manipulation and control. The most profound lesson I learned was that success doesn't obligate you to fund other people's dysfunction, and financial stability doesn't make you responsible for solving family problems you didn't create. Real love supports independence and growth. It doesn't demand sacrifice of your well-being for someone else's comfort. Today, Tyler is 18 months clean and building a life based on his own choices rather than family manipulation. I continue growing my business and pursuing my dreams without the constant threat of family crisis and financial extraction. And my parents are learning slowly and sometimes painfully that authentic relationships require honesty, respect, and genuine support rather than exploitation disguised as love. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with family members who tried to take advantage of your success? I'd love to hear about your experiences with toxic family dynamics and how you found the strength to protect yourself while still hoping for genuine healing. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are against people who are supposed to love us unconditionally, and it takes tremendous courage to demand the respect we deserve. Please like this video if Tyler's story of breaking free from financial exploitation resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation and building healthy relationships, and share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar toxic family dynamics. Your support helps other people realize they're not alone in these difficult situations. Thank you for listening to our story and for being part of a community that believes family love should lift people up rather than tear them down. I hope Tyler's journey toward genuine recovery and my experience fighting back against financial abuse gives you hope that toxic family patterns can be broken and authentic relationships are possible when we have the courage to demand better treatment. Remember that you deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care, and that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish. It's the foundation for building the kind of family connections that actually deserve the name.